to him that they have that right. Please use it.
The Honourable, the member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Glace Bay for joining in the applause. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. Last June, the Auditor General delivered a devastating report on the state of maintenance enforcement in this province. According to that report, total arrears as of last March 31st stood at some $106 million. That's money that's needed to support children and families in this province. The report also made clear that since taking responsibility from the courts for maintenance enforcement, from the courts in '96, neither this government nor the previous Liberal government got the job done. So my question to the current Minister of Justice is, why did this government allow maintenance enforcement to reach such a state of disarray?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I actually want to thank my honourable critic in the New Democratic Party for their question, because one of the things it highlights, unfortunately, is something very regrettable, that indeed people are delinquent in their obligations, and it's something we take very seriously. And in responding to the Auditor's report, the Department has responded to that with regards to the staffing associated with that, and indeed the level of enforcement around that, Mr. Speaker, is improving, and we'll continue to work on that. And I want to echo, we take this very seriously and treat it very seriously and are working on the enforcement.
The Honourable the member for Timberlea Prospect on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 months after the AG's report on this sorry state of maintenance enforcement in the province, the government got around to appointing a full-time director. That's something that should have happened 10 years ago. At this rate, and the government is moving, it'll take another 10 years to straighten out the mess it's allowed to develop in the maintenance enforcement program in Nova Scotia. So my question to the minister is, when will he implement the remainder of the 18, and I remind him again, 18 total recommendations made by the Auditor General for correcting the problems in the maintenance enforcement program in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And to my honourable colleague, I just want to indicate that we did accept all 18 recommendations that were made by the Auditor General. Work is ongoing, as was indicated. A Director of Maintenance Enforcement was hired, and we have 50 very qualified Nova Scotians that are working as staff across this province in 6 different locations to do just that, and I'll be pleased to provide the member with an update at the earliest opportunity.
The Honourable the member for Timberlea Prospect on his final supplementary.
Thank you. And Mr. Minister, having worked with many people in maintenance enforcement, I assure you they are professional, but they're overworked and their caseloads are heavy. The Auditor General found close to 20,000 cases in arrears. 20,000 cases. He found that in half the files reviewed, there was no evidence of enforcement efforts for the previous 12-month period because those maintenance enforcement officers are just overworked. Well, my question to the minister is, when will he step up enforcement in a meaningful way and ensure that children and former spouses are getting the maintenance support they need and deserve to have a quality of life in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, to my honourable colleague, I'll be pleased to bring forward further statistics that we are making progress in reducing the outstanding amount that's there. And it's very sad that the maintenance enforcement program has over 19,500 cases that these staff are working on. But what I can assure the member is those numbers are coming down, and I'll be pleased to present that data to him before the House.
The Honourable the member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health.
You don't have a health critic?
A new restorative care unit at Digby General is complete. Its staff is on hand. It's just one problem. There's no doctor in the house. The benefit of the restorative care unit is that patients get recuperation time in hospital rather than being sent home prematurely, reducing the likelihood of further trips to the hospital. $1.7 million was spent on construction of this unit, which includes 13 beds for patients recovering from stroke and orthopedic surgery. The unit was originally scheduled to open in the fall of 2006, but construction issues delayed its opening. Now the only hurdle left is to find a doctor to lead this brand new restorative care unit. My question to the minister: when will a doctor be hired for the restorative care unit at the Digby General?
Good job.
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as the member did so eloquently explain, Southwest Health was funded for a restorative care unit to serve Southwest Health and Annapolis Valley. They were provided $1.6 million to create those 50 restorative beds. Unfortunately, the physician moved away in June of 2007, so there is no physician coverage at this time. Southwest Health continues its efforts to create a restorative unit for patients in the district, as well as for Annapolis Valley Health. And for what we understand, they have a tentative agreement in place for a physician to cover that unit.
The Honourable, the member for Digby Annapolis on his first supplementary.
The lack of a physician is holding up more than opening of the new restorative care unit, the Digby General. Without a collaborating doctor, Southwest DHA is unable to hire nurse practitioners for the hospital, even though interviews were held more than a month ago. Nurse practitioners were promised by this government as a solution to the extreme number of closures happening in our ER. So far this year, we've had over 1,400 hours of closures at the Digby General, more than 3 times as many as last year. For some unknown reason, the Minister of Health thinks this number is acceptable. My question to the Minister: when will the department put Digby on their priority list for a doctor so we can open our restorative care unit and get our nurse practitioners in the ER?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that kind of closure is not acceptable, and I have said that on a number of occasions here in the House. Mr. Speaker, physician recruitment for Digby have been successful. You would know that from what he was talking about. The Southwest Nova District Health Authority has been working hard to recruit the replacement family doctors. It's recently announced that a new family physician would be starting practice in Digby, and a second candidate looks promising.
The Honourable, the member for Digby Annapolis on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we've been hearing that since July, but there's still 6,000 people in Digby without a family doctor. We have received an ER doctor, which is there a very few short hours through the week because he's semi-retired. Now there's a concern that those already selected for nurse practitioner positions at the Digby General may not be available when the time finally comes that a doctor is in place. Luckily, there has been plenty of other work to keep the staff that was hired for the restorative care unit busy within the hospital. But if this government doesn't act soon, we may have to start all over again. So my final question to the minister is: will the minister commit to hiring a doctor for the restorative care unit and a collaborating physician for the nurse practitioners, and tell us when that doctor will be in place?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Again, Mr. Speaker, the recruitment, the successes combined with the District Health Authority's ability to secure locums coverage has resulted in the Digby Hospital being open on a more regular basis. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with the District Health Authority, with members of the community, to make sure that Digby is on top of the list and will have those physicians available to them. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with the District Health Authority to make sure that those nurse practitioners have doctors to work with. Mr. Speaker, we will do everything possible to make sure that the people of Digby and Annapolis have the doctors that they need.
The Honourable, the member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Natural Resources. I want to table some rather devastating pictures here of property that's adjacent to Bob Bancroft in Antigonish County. Mr. Bancroft is the Eastern Regional Woodlot Owner of the Year. And Mr. Bancroft has spent over 3 decades re-establishing the natural Acadian forest and rehabilitating the stream that runs through his property. As you can be seen in the photos, the land is clear-cut and it's deeply rutted. The impact is not limited to the adjacent property owner, as Mr. Bancroft's stream is filled with silt, reversing years of very hard work. So my question to the minister, since he praises woodlot owners like Bob Bancroft, what does he propose to do to protect Nova Scotia's forests from such devastation?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for his question. Indeed, Bob Bancroft did win the award for that part of the province. He is exemplary in the way he operates his woodlot, and in terms of protecting the forestry sector, we will vote against the bill that was tabled by that member in this House. That's how we'll protect the forestry sector, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the member for Pictou West on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Bancroft did report the problem to the Department of Natural Resources. Then the company was at fault, and they were issued warnings. And here's a quote from Mr. Bancroft. He stated, "The company stuck up a couple of token little silt traps, bales of hay, and some filter fabric. But nothing they put in lasted, and nothing they put in was adequate. The company countered that they had done everything they were required to do. There was nothing more the department asked of them. So in light of the damage illustrated in those photos that I tabled, my question to the minister is, if this damage is the result of doing all that is required, why should people like Bob Bancroft bother even trying?"
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much again for giving me the opportunity to respond to some of the messages from the opposition, and particularly the opposition critic. Mr. Speaker, I want the opposition critic to know that the forestry sector is very much aware of the activities and the position that has been forward by the official opposition. They are greatly concerned by them. But, Mr. Speaker, I assure you that this government does not agree with the opposition's position as tabled in the member's bill.
The Honourable the member for Pictou West on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you know, it would be bad enough if this was only isolated to the property next door to Mr. Bancroft, but it's not, unfortunately. I want to table some other photos here that I'll ask the page to pick up. And it's photos of some land near Kedgie Park in the southwest part of the province, and also in the southwest Margaree and Cape Breton, that show real devastation here in our province. And it's happening all over Nova Scotia. So my question to the minister, what does this minister intend to do to better protect our natural environment from these very poor forestry practices?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the forestry industry does have some challenges. There's no question about it. In fact, the member opposite is one of them. Mr. Speaker, in terms of their support for the industry and the major employer in Pictou West, and I'm going to table this again, Mr. Speaker. This is a quote from the honourable member. "The pulp fiber industry is an important one, but..." What does he mean, but? This is the major employer in Pictou West, and that's how he supports the forestry sector, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable the member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my question is for the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage. Last week, the Minister indicated that tourism strongly supports repealing the Tourism Accommodations Act. There are 1,200 licensed accommodation properties in Nova Scotia, and out of these, 850 are small operators. They're beds and breakfasts, they're inns, they're cottages. He may not have spoken with these businesses, but I have, and they do not support repealing the Act. In fact, the Bed and Breakfast Association has very recently written the Minister asking for better enforcement of the existing Act. So I ask the Minister, in repealing this Act, why is he choosing to ignore the preferences of nearly 2/3 of this industry?
The Honourable the Minister of Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes conversation can get very lively in the House, and sometimes the facts can be exaggerated. But before me, Mr. Speaker, I have an endorsement of the chair of the B&B Breakfast operators in Nova Scotia, along with a number of other chairs of different boards that reflect the tie-ins approach to repeal the Tourist Accommodation Act that has been has been sanctioned by Tyans. The voice, Mr. Speaker, the voice of the industry. Mr. Speaker, I repeat myself, the voice of the industry, and as Minister of the Government, and as under the direction of our Premier, we listen to Nova Scotians, and I'm proud to table this document here, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Atlantic on our first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, that voice of the industry was speaking yesterday on CBC Radio. And at that point, yesterday, December 4th, the president of the industry said that they support this move because the government had not been upholding the Act, and that their preference was, in fact, as shown through previous lobbying, that there would be stricter enforcement of the Act. In other words, it's second best. This government's inaction had shaken the industry's faith so badly in its ability to regulate tourist accommodations that they would prefer to see them give it up. Hardly something to brag about, Mr. Speaker. And my question is, was this government even ensuring dissatisfaction with the Act by failing to address complaints against infractions?
The Honourable the Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, it's obvious that the member is against the voice of the people in the industry. It is obviously, she is clearly stating that, and I stand firm on the record that we're supporting industry. And Mr. Speaker, that group over there will paint the picture any way they want, but the picture I'm painting today is the position of this government to support the industry and the people of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Atlantic on her final supplementary.
It may, in fact, be this government's position, but it would appear that it is not the industry's position, as on record on CBC. And more clearly, the small operators have written that they are worried about the direction this department is taking. When they asked to see the consultant's report on the Tourism Accommodation Act, they were told no. So at the very least, I would ask the Minister, since he will not speak on behalf of all, will he at least publicly release the results of the survey and the consultant's report?
The Honourable the Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly inform the member I would never look towards him for advice, but Mr. Speaker, as a critic,
order, please.
Mr. Speaker,
The Honourable the Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I'm saddened today to know that that critic did not attend the function last week to hear my comments and support the industry. Mr. Speaker, that's what I'm telling Nova Scotia. The critic was not at the Tyans luncheon to hear the minister speak and to explain clearly the facts. Shame on that member.
The Honourable the Member for Richmond. Order, please. The Honourable the Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the Premier travelled to his constituency the last few weekends, he would have been witness to the unfortunate situation along the Canso Causeway this fall. Mr. Speaker, this time of the year brings various types of fish which find their way along the causeway. As a result, many types of birds, including seagulls, feed on this fish. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, due to high winds and overhead power lines, many of these birds come to an untimely end. Mr. Speaker, the result, Mr. Speaker, is dozens of dead birds on the roadway and along the Canso Causeway. My question to the Premier is, does the Premier or his government have any plan to address this most unfortunate situation?
The Honourable the Premier.
Yeah.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I think I'll refer that one to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Between now and spring, the snowplow. Snowplow. The snowplow will take them off.
What?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Premier for passing that to me.
It's for the birds, I tell you.
Order, please. The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
In all seriousness, Mr. Speaker, I am partial to seagulls, and certainly I'm concerned for their safety, and I'm concerned for the safety of the highways, and I will certainly take it upon the advice, and I thank the honourable member for bringing it forward. I'll certainly take it upon his advice and bring it back to the department. And maybe, Mr. Speaker, we can visit the area to have a seat, to look at that catastrophe that's taking place in the area to see what maybe they'll do to clean it up.
The Honourable the Member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I would urge him not to fly too high if he's feeding on the fish along the causeway. Mr. Speaker, the problem is that this is a recurring issue, yet it does not appear that there's a plan in place to address it. These dead birds are not only unsightly, but they also pose a distraction to drivers, which the Minister of Transportation has already indicated that he is trying to avoid. Many cars swerve to avoid these dead birds, posing a danger to the oncoming traffic. So my question again to the Premier is, what action will his government take to remove these deceased birds in a timely fashion from the Canso Causeway?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to refer that again to the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
The seagull of you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The gall of the member to bring something like that before the House, you know. Mr. Speaker, the seagulls are a species, obviously, Mr. Speaker, and they play a very important role in the history of this province. And I believe the Minister of Natural Resources, I'm sure, will have something to say about some very important issues, so I'll ask him to respond, please.
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious matter, and Mr. Speaker, it is true that some species of seagull may be rare, but I'm pleased to say that none of them are on the endangered species list, to the best of my knowledge.
The Honourable the Member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, the Canso Causeway is the welcoming point to Cape Breton Island. People traveling to Cape Breton should not have to drive through this carnage of dead birds, which has now been present for several weeks. Now, Mr. Speaker, being I mentioned Cape Breton Island, maybe this will go to the Minister of Tourism from the Premier, but again, I do ask the question, is that will the Premier commit to review the causes of this problem and put in place a plan to either avoid this from happening or to collect and properly dispose of these dead birds?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we'll put it on our list of priorities, Mr. Speaker, and we'll make sure that the proper attention is paid to the question, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, the follow-up survey of high school graduates was published last week. Better than half of the 2,000-plus respondents who left school 8 years ago felt they could have benefited from additional courses in skill development, in particular English and personal finance. However, the most common suggestions were greater course selection and better career guidance. Mr. Speaker, through you, I would like to ask the Minister how she proposes to respond to these suggestions from the class of 1998.
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very familiar with that report, and there were many parts of that report that were very complimentary to our program. But as always, within the department, we are reviewing our initiatives, we're reviewing our course selection, and where there's a need, we will provide additional courses.
The Honourable the Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, according to the report, the average annual salary of college graduates living outside the province is around $46,000. The average annual salary for college graduates living and working here in Nova Scotia is just over $32,000. That's a paycheck that's 42% lower. And yet, we as a province, we are crying out for qualified, skilled, highly paid tradespeople, but only 8% of students took up an apprenticeship. Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell us how she is going to improve on those results?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member opposite and to all members of the House. One of the things that I've been able to brag about within the department, one of the probably the most progressive moves within the Department of Education has been to look at skilled labor, career options, and hands-on programs for students who may not be university bound, but who are definitely needed in the workforce. And we have options and opportunities within our high schools. We've extended that program to 34 high schools now, so our students will have some choices, and they will be able to make informed decisions, and they will go into the trades in this province, and they will make a good living.
The Honourable the member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, only 2% of female graduates register as an apprentice since graduating high school. The completion rate for apprentices is less than 50%. Many individuals get offered jobs before they complete their apprenticeship. That is why we are in the crisis that we are in now when it comes to the key trades. Mr. Speaker, my final question to the minister is, how will she convince our young people that an apprenticeship is a valid and lucrative career choice?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, there are two programs in particular that address the concern the member has raised. One is our ongoing work with industry and business to provide apprenticeship opportunities for our young people. And the second is the excellent relationship we have with the community college. We have now an enrollment at the community college that exceeds 10,000. These are the future workforce of our province.
The Honourable the member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation. In the speech from the throne, the Conservative government dusted off an old promise when the Premier committed to the twinning and the modernisation of Nova Scotia highways from Sydney to Yarmouth by 2020. However, Mr. Speaker, past governments didn't deliver, and I'm not quite so sure that this government will deliver either. And our current roads, Mr. Speaker, linking our rural communities are in a shambles. Can the minister be a bit more specific with commitments and tell the residents of the South Shore when they will have safer roads and highways?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure the Honourable member realizes this morning in the Chronicle Herald, in fact, there was a tender for her own area of this province.
Order, please. The Honourable the member for Queens on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, and I was very pleased to hear that yesterday, and because I've been doing a lot of advocacy. I've been doing a lot of advocacy for the roads in my riding. But I want to draw the minister's attention to the section of the 103 between Broad River in Queens and the Sable River in Shelburne County, which has seen several accidents in the past few years and requires a lot of upgrading. It has been acknowledged as one of the more dangerous sections of the highway. Our federal and municipal representatives have all identified this stretch of highway as a priority. I was told by the previous minister in a letter that I will table today that the department planning work was in process so that when funding becomes available, work can begin. My question is to the Minister, where in the process is this preliminary planning?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, the NDP are little Johnny come lately, but that's okay, Mr. Speaker. We'll explain today that as a result of recent announcement of the federal government, I met with the federal member, the Honourable Gerald Kitty, for the area, Mr. Speaker. I've also met with the MLA for Chester St. Margaret's, the Honourable Minister of Health. Who else was there? Yeah, my colleague, the member from Yarmouth, the Minister of Eastern Shore, Mr. Speaker, and several other members, Mr. Speaker, have brought this very important issue to my attention. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, we're going to give it our undivided attention in regards to that highway, Mr. Speaker, to make it safe.
The Honourable the member for Queens on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, residents who live in the communities of Port Jolly, Port Mattoon, and on the St. Catharines Road have called me for the past year and a half about their concerns and have also given some suggestions to make this stretch a lot safer. And I have been in communications with several of the members as well in regards to this. A bypass through this area is one clear and sensible solution. Now that we know there are federal dollars available for projects like this, my question to the Minister, when will the construction begin on this section of the highway?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
I'm getting some help here from my colleagues on the date there, Mr. Speaker. But again, Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate to the House that I have met with the federal member and several of my colleagues in regards to that issue. It's very important to this government. I know how important a piece of highway that is, and we'll have some news on that in the near future, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today my question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, on June 28, 2007, the Minister announced a review committee to examine teacher education in our province. One of the committee's mandates was to examine the potential of expanding current programs to other universities. Mr. Speaker, Cape Breton University has expressed its interest in offering its own Bachelor of Education program. Currently, all 4 universities that offer BEd programs in the province are turning away students because of limited capacity issues. Cape Breton University already runs a joint program with Memorial University and has the capacity to offer the programs to students who don't want to obtain their teaching degrees outside the province. Cape Breton University is also the only university on Cape Breton Island, and Mr. Speaker, it is ready. My question to the Minister, will the Minister consider Cape Breton University's request to offer a Bachelor of Education program?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite, I have called for the review. That review has been completed. The report is to be delivered to my desk in the second week of December, so I can expect it any time. But during the course of that review, the team did meet with every university, including Cape Breton University. I understand that Cape Breton University presented an excellent proposal to that committee. I will not prejudge the outcome of that review or my response, but I do compliment them on the presentation that they made to the committee.
The Honourable the member for Cape Breton South on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my first supplementary. Enrollment figures obtained from the University of Fort Kent reveal that as many as 217 Nova Scotians were enrolled in their teaching program during the 2006-07 year. Furthermore, the University of Presque Isle had as many as 98 Nova Scotians enrolled in their program the same year. Over 300 Nova Scotians were forced to leave the province for those 2 universities alone, many of them, Mr. Speaker, from Cape Breton. Mr. Speaker, Cape Breton University has expressed its desire to offer a BEd program to Nova Scotians. Currently, Cape Breton is the only region in the province that does not offer a Bachelor of Education program. It's time that this government provide a teacher education to all regions of the province. And my question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister promote regional equality and award a CBU a BEd program?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite, The numbers of students who have to leave this province to take a degree in education disturbs me greatly, and it's one of the reasons I called for the review. I have stated publicly I do not believe that any student in Nova Scotia who wishes to take a BEd program should have to leave the province, and I expect that at the end of this review and the implementation of the recommendations, they will not have to leave this province.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's a well-known fact that most Cape Bretoners who are trying to get a post-secondary education, postgraduate education, can't afford to go off island to get that education, can't afford to go to places like Maine, or even in some cases to mainland universities because they have to stay in residence. If they had the university program in Cape Breton, they would be able to live at home and get their Bachelor of Education degree at the same time, saving a great deal of money. Mr. Speaker, since the 2004-05 school year, there has been approximately 600 teachers' retirements. This means that 1 in 6 teachers have retired over the past 2 years alone. Mr. Speaker, not only does CBU have the ability to provide teacher education so Nova Scotians are not forced to leave the province, it can also help deal with the teacher shortages the province will be facing. Mr. Speaker, Cape Breton University already runs a joint BEd program with Memorial University. And as I stated before, that's simply not acceptable that a university the quality of Cape Breton University should have to do this for any time in the future. So my question to the Minister, irregardless of what the report states when it comes out, I would hope that the Minister will give serious consideration to a Bachelor of Education program at Cape Breton University. Mr. Speaker, Cape Breton University can do it, and I would expect this Minister to approve it, and I would ask her through you, Mr. Speaker, to approve that degree.
The Honourable, the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, the comment that is made about the geography of this province and the location of the teacher training institutions is an issue. It's a reality, and to have all of those located in Metro or close to Metro is unacceptable. And as I said earlier, the program that's offered at CBU is commendable, and I will take the members' comments under advisement.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Service. Nova Scotia's housing stock is aging, and many low-income homeowners rely on housing repair grants just to keep their homes fit to live in. The income cutoffs have been increased, but they are still far too low, and very needy families are still being turned away. The department even includes the child tax benefit in its calculations, which is denying too many families in need as a result. So I ask the Minister of Community Services, when will she admit that the income cutoffs are still far too low to help families in need?
Honourable, the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for recognizing that we've increased, Mr. Speaker, the household income levels. We were pleased to do that, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that more Nova Scotians had access to those programs. Mr. Speaker, we offer a menu of approximately 13 repair programs across this province, Mr. Speaker. This year's budget was $18.4 million, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue to work with Nova Scotians to ensure that this very large budget continues to be expanded upon, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton Nova on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another problem is with the amount of grants when people get them. The amount given isn't enough for families to hire a legitimate contractor, so they find someone who is willing to work for the money they can pay. The results are predictable, Mr. Speaker. Work is done in a haphazard way. It is left incomplete or fails inspection altogether. Then the family is left with an even worse situation and no money to fix it. My question to the Minister, why doesn't her department pay enough money for repairs so that families can hire a legitimate contractor?
The Honourable, the Minister of Education. The Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for the opportunity again to speak about the $18.5 million budget, Mr. Speaker, because we recognize that we have a very large portfolio, Mr. Speaker, approximately 11,500 provincially owned public housing units. Excuse me. And, Mr. Speaker, it requires a tremendous amount of money to keep those units, to keep the upkeep on those units, Mr. Speaker, as well as the other menu of repair programs. So, Mr. Speaker, again, we will continue to increase the budget each year and continue to do the great job that we are, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton Nova on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my office has had many calls from families in bad situations. Let's just say, Mr. Speaker, that Mike Holmes could fill many seasons of his program fixing the housing grant repairs in the province of Nova Scotia. My question to the Minister of Community Service: why doesn't her department review this program and help families to ensure the repairs are done right and don't make their situations even worse?
Right on. The Honourable, the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, a large menu of programs, Mr. Speaker, to meet the needs of the Nova Scotians who need our assistance, Mr. Speaker. $18.5 million, Mr. Speaker, as a budget. And, Mr. Speaker, I will comment that there are numerous contractors across this province, Mr. Speaker, who do a tremendous job, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of their industry, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure that my honourable colleague would acknowledge that those contractors are certainly experiencing challenges when it comes to getting workers, Mr. Speaker, and fulfilling their mandates. But, Mr. Speaker, this side of the House will continue to support that private sector industry, Mr. Speaker, and I would encourage my honourable colleagues to do the same.
The Honourable, the member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Health. The Maritime Oddfellows Home in Pictou is perhaps one of our finest nursing homes in this province. And in 2003, this Conservative government passed legislation regarding this nursing home's tax bill. The home was assessed to pay $111,406, over 10 times what it had paid previous to this, over 10 times. Yet, Health Department officials refused to adjust the operating budget. So my question to the Minister of Health: why isn't his department helping this not-for-profit facility pay the taxes that his government ordered them to pay?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are aware of the issue that the Oddfellows home is having in Pictou. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to review to make sure dollars are available that make sense. Mr. Speaker, we'll take that under advisement and look forward to getting back to the member opposite on a response.
The Honourable, the member for Pictou West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are over 75 nursing homes in this province, yet this government has chosen to single out the Maritime Oddfellows home. The home has no surplus funds, it's a non-profit entity, and it has no way of paying for the increased taxes. Now, the town of Pictou certainly needs all of its tax revenue, but there has to be a realistic reflection in the home's Department of Health approved operating budget to reflect its tax bill. So my question again to the Minister: what will he do with the nearly 50 residents if this home is forced to close because it can't pay its tax bill?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the member opposite that that home will not be forced to close.
The Honourable, the member for Pictou West on his final supplement.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's certainly reassuring to hear, because there's a lot of concern there by the administration right at this present time. It seems like this nursing home has been singled out by the legislation. Its budget now is looming. They're trying to set it for next year, and they don't know how they're going to pay their tax bill. And the town of Pictou fully supports the home in seeking a fair resolution. So my question again through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister: will he commit to sitting down with the representatives of the Maritime Oddfellows home and the administration in the town of Pictou to help find a fair solution to this very serious problem?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to watch this one closely and make sure that that a calculation will be made that makes sense for the ongoing running of that facility, making sure that all residents can be secure and safe in that community.
The Honourable, the member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, last week the Minister of Agriculture was quoted as saying, "We have limited resources to go around, and my government made the decision that we're not going to continue to prop up producers that won't and haven't moved to more profitable, more sustainable way of doing things." Mr. Speaker, these hog farmers didn't need propping up, as the minister put it. They needed short-term funding initiative to transition out farmers and a long-term adjustment plan to aid farmers who wanted to keep the industry alive. It's clear the Conservative government was not prepared to correctly assist this industry. My question to the minister is, without a litany of past support, I ask, why have you deserted hog farmers in Nova Scotia?
Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, as we've said earlier in the House, this government has put more than $60 million into the hog industry in Nova Scotia since the year 2000. And as well, I should mention to my colleagues that in addition, the Farm Loan Board has $20.6 million of loans extended to hog producers in Nova Scotia. So I would correct the honourable member and say this government, in fact, is doing a lot for pork producers in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable the member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in 2005, pork industry officials provided the Conservative government with a detailed report on how to properly transition and aid the industry with a financial plan. The Conservative government didn't listen. They were given the Kelco report earlier this year. They didn't listen. Farmers leaving the industry need support to leave without enormous debt. Hog support veiled through Farm Loan Board loans must be written off. They are not listening. My question to the minister, why have you failed to properly consult industry officials and implement the correct programs to help this important industry?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I'm continually reminded by my colleagues from Kings North and Kings South about the difficulties that pork producers in Nova Scotia are facing. And in fact, the member for Clare and the member for Kings West, as well as the member for East Hants, all recognize that the farming community is going through many challenges, especially the pork and beef sectors. But the government is working with the producers, but we're not going to act irresponsible. And as I said earlier, we're not going to expect the taxpayers of Nova Scotia to pay the difference between the cost of production and what some of the farmers are actually getting for that product. Mr. Speaker, it's phenomenal, the losses that the pork producers are incurring, but thankfully some of the producers are willing to rationalize. They're moving to sow barns, they're shipping weaners, we have omega-3 products, we have natural pork, we have people that are moving ahead. We're working with them through the Farm Loan Board, through existing programs, through grants, and through transition funding programs. So to stand here in the House and suggest that the government isn't doing anything is absolutely, quite frankly, if I might, Mr. Speaker, misleading the House.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture may want to reconsider that last phrase. No, you're not.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, if in fact you as Speaker of the House have difficulty with that member misleading the House, I will withdraw that comment.
Order, please. The Honourable the member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, the minister hasn't taken a trip down to the valley recently because we are losing one farmer a week from the hog and the cattle industries here in Nova Scotia. So, Speaker, the hog industry, the fishing industry, the forestry industry, the cattle industry, all are in jeopardy, and this Conservative government has neglected the primary industries that employ thousands, generate hundreds of millions of dollars a year, while I sit back and put funding into failed programs. My question to the minister, what is your government's plan to save our ailing primary industries?
Honourable the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, the member for Kings West is going all over the traditional resource-based spectrum. In fact, he introduced a bill in this House that, in fact, would jeopardize the future of forestry in the province of Nova Scotia and many other agriculture industries. So, you know, I frankly don't know where he's coming from, but I do know that this government, this minister, this Department of Agriculture is working hard and going to continue to work hard to help some of these farmers transition to something that is profitable. But we will not ask the taxpayers of Nova Scotia to continually subsidize non-profitable organizations, or pardon me, producers.
The Honourable, the member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Economic Development. In November 2006, your predecessor told the House that he had staff dedicated to the development of a government procurement policy that banned sweatshop-produced goods. Since then, numerous media reports have appeared describing child labor in sweatshops and even slavery. No. The issue of sweatshop-produced goods has not gone away. I would like to ask the Minister, when is this government's policy on sweatshop-produced goods going to be published?
The Honourable, the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will defer to your ruling. There is a bill before the House on that subject matter, and I don't know if it's appropriate for me to respond to the question or whether it's something that should be saved for debate on the bill.
You may decide to answer in a general fashion, but we can't talk about specifics of any bill while it is under the House. The Honourable, the member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the commentary on my bill. Mr. Speaker, in 2005, the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union passed a resolution calling for a no sweatshop policy in government procurement. That was over 2 years ago, and government staff who have been lobbying for this change are still waiting for a policy to be introduced by the Office of Economic Development. An anti-sweatshop procurement policy would primarily impact on uniforms and other clothing purchased by the province. So I would like to ask the Minister, what's causing the delay?
I would remind the Minister and the member for Pictou East that you cannot discuss a bill that is before the House. You can talk in generalities, but you cannot be specific. So, the Honourable, the Minister of Economic Development.
What is the bill?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to let the honourable member for Glace Bay know that I did indeed hear his remarks and appreciate the fact that he's listened to me in the past. Mr. Speaker, I'm very much aware of the rules of the House with respect to the legislation that is before the House, and any comments that I'm going to make will respect that tradition. I would want to share with members of the House, Mr. Speaker, an experience that I had in visiting a garment shop in Delhi, India. And I must say that I was, when I went through that shop, I was very impressed with what I saw in terms of working conditions, in terms of the attitude of workers, the safety precautions that were taken, the ventilation that was there. And I did ask the owners of the facility about the issue of child labor and about working conditions, and their response to me was one that was very encouraging. And I'm not going to draw general conclusions from one specific instance, but they did say that their customers are regular visitors to the facility, and they need to ensure that the conditions there meet the standards of their customers. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that in the long run is going to be the best way of getting it, and good publicity that causes major purchasers to react in that way is something that all society needs to encourage.
The Honourable, the member for Pictou East, on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the NSGEU resolution passed in 2005 is clear. It is in the interest of the Government of Nova Scotia to purchase goods and services from responsible manufacturers. It goes on to say, pressure from institutional purchasers, such as governments, is an effective way to combat sweatshop practices. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Minister, when is this government going to put some pressure on sweatshops?
The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, we'll do so by buying locally from firms like Stanfields and Wearwell Garments.
The Honourable the Member for Digby Annapolis.
My question is to the Minister of Tourism. You know in Digby that we're having a problem with our Digby Ferry, and it creates a lot of economic development for tourism. I'm just wondering if the Department of Tourism has any worries about the Digby Ferry, and if they plan to do anything about it, and we have 1 year left.
The Honourable the Minister of Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member across the way. The Department of Tourism is very concerned about tourism in Nova Scotia and very concerned about the industry that's brought to Nova Scotia through the tourism industry and the ferries. Mr. Speaker,
order, please.
The
time allotted for oral questions by members has expired. The Honourable the Liberal House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill 35?
Bill number 35.
The Education Act, yes.
The Education Act. The Honourable the Member for Kings West.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased today to rise in my place and speak on a very important bill before the legislature. It is an area that is simply critical to many parents and their children, that they get tuition support in order for them to go to one of the private schools that will enable them to overcome their learning disability. I was very pleased this summer, after meeting with the minister, that she was prepared to put in place a special education review panel. Since then, the minister's report of services for students with special needs has come forward, and now it's in the final stages of hearing from Nova Scotians about the recommendations that have been put forth. Our bill is really an outgrowth of that report, because there was one of the recommendations in this report, recommendation number 3. The Minister of Education and Government announced the end of tuition support programs effective June the 30th, 2010. So that's the recommendation, that this bill is trying to close the loophole here, change the direction at least of this one recommendation. Now, over the past 4 years, the tuition support program, and I do really want to compliment the parents who have asked, perhaps through a number of MLAs, to have tuition support put in place. And meetings that I've been involved with now go back almost 5 years. And one of the outcomes of parents and MLAs challenging government on tuition support is to see that it's gone through a transition of 3 changes in this particular formula, where only 1 year was supported, then it went to 2 years of support, and finally 3 years of support. I believe now is the time to take a look at the tuition support for the next couple of decades. Special education teachers A couple of the superintendents that I've talked to realize that the public school education system, and it is one that I always speak strongly about because it does a tremendous job for the vast majority of students in Nova Scotia. But there will be, and perhaps always will be, a small number whose needs will not be met in the public school education. So I feel now is the time through legislation or in some manner, for the minister and her government to have tuition support go forward for the next several decades, and also to look at whether or not we should limit it to the current 3 years. Now, I say that with a significant qualification, and that is, I believe there will only be a few children, only a handful of children, who will need to get assistance beyond 3 years. I feel that the 3 current private schools can help children remediate, provide them with strategies that will assist their learning, overcome the learning disability, and will go back and be successful in the public education system. However, there will always, again, as I say, be a handful. In speaking recently with the principal of Bridgeway Academy, she in fact concurs with this view, that of the 100 students that they have, there would only be a few who would need to go beyond the current 3 years of support. Recently, at a standing committee, we heard from 5 parents or a combination of grandparents about the experience of their child or grandchild in the public school education when a learning disability was keeping them from being successful and achieving strongly academically, socially, emotionally, and with proper adjustment in the public school. We heard stories, in fact, from these parents and grandparents that really gripped all members of the standing committee to want to do something that would enable their children to experience success. One of the things from the standing committee that all of us came away, I'm sure, disturbed by was the fact of the torturous, really, experience in the public school education to get their child tested and to get in place a system of supports, and then those supports not meeting the need of their child or grandchild, and really having to look at going to one of the private schools in order to address their learning disability. So we heard from them that their child often had to be 2 or 3 years behind in their academic performance before they'd really get the psychoeducational assessment that they needed. We also heard from a few that getting an IPP was difficult because IPPs tend to go more in the direction of children who are delayed, who have that global development delay of a couple of years, those who have mental challenges, and I believe unofficially, because I've heard on a number of occasions from different sources that perhaps the Department of Education, in fact, has discouraged IPPs with some of our learning disabled, and especially those who are gifted and who are very bright students and who kind of can get along in school but don't get the substantial learning that they do need because of that disability. So then they're without an IPP, which is one of the criteria required, and there are some students then who are not able to get the tuition support. So as we move forward, I think it was short-sighted on the review panel's decision to look at curtailing tuition support in our province, because we will always have those students who will need the additional help that the private school is able to support children with the most severe learning disabilities. How critical is this support? Well, we know for many families they could not even think about going to one of the 3 private schools if this was not in place. They simply would not have the financial means to be able to have their child get this placement. And in many ways, you know, every child in Nova Scotia is entitled to public funding that will secure an education for their future. It currently is about $6,400, and that is transferred to that private institution to enable them to receive their education. So it's critical from that point of view that parents could not get the education. Also, many students with learning disabilities drop out. If there is one way in which we can support the non-report, it is through helping children with learning disabilities. 75% of those at the Correctional Center in Waterville, those in our other institutions, have learning disabilities. So with that, I will take my place, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to stand here as a member of the House to discuss Bill 35 and the calls for amendments to the Education Act that are contained in that bill. And I do want to thank the member opposite for putting that bill forward. As educators, we have discussed many times the importance of providing a program that will meet the needs of all of the students across the spectrum, and the group that benefit from the tuition support program are no exception. Also want to make reference to the special ed review that was conducted, and when the mandate for that particular review was struck, one of the things that we wanted to do was to make sure that we provided opportunity for people across the province to have an opportunity to come and speak before the committee, or to give a presentation, a written presentation, if they were not able to do an oral presentation. And that review was very thorough. It did cover the geography of our province. And when that report and set of recommendations came in to me, we also took another opportunity, Mr. Speaker, and that was to give people an opportunity to react to the report and recommendations. And we garnered a lot of reaction, a lot of input. And so it's taken a bit of time to take all of those reports and reactions and comments that came out of both the consultation and the response to put together my formal response to that. But I do believe it was a good review, and I do believe that the voices of all people across the province were heard. In particular, I do want to thank the parents of those students who have learning disabilities and who may have students taking advantage of the tuition support program, who did come out and who did express their concerns. And I commend them for standing up for their own children and the needs of their children. I also commend them for sharing their stories with us, and also for their patience, because, as the member has so rightly noted, the tuition support program has listened to those parents, and it did begin initially as a 1-year, extended to a 2, and then to a 3, and really the extension of that program was based very much on the reaction and the response from parents who believed that that program was making a difference with their and for their children. But, Mr. Speaker, I must first state that this government's goal is very simple, and that is to ensure that every student in Nova Scotia, through our public education system, has appropriate programming. This includes students with a wide range of abilities and needs. And in addition to that, we believe that every student is entitled to have that quality programming and that appropriate programming in an environment where they're surrounded by their peers. This means getting that program in their local school or close to their home school community. And I will speak a little bit to one of the concerns that I have, and I know the member opposite shares with me, about where those programs are delivered and how that could deny access for some students because of geography. In 2004-2005, this government recognized that not all students were having their special needs met in the public school system. And I commend the government of the day for recognizing that and taking some steps to make sure that we could support and help those students. It's one thing to recognize the need, and in the short term, we put in place the tuition support program. But the other thing that I commend the department for is looking at why we're not meeting the needs of those students in our public schools and what we might do in order to improve that. So, as I've said, the tuition support program was designed for students with special needs. It was designed as a short-term intervention. It was never intended to be a long-term solution. And so when we look at where we are now and what we have to do with that program, there are some significant challenges, and I do want to mention those. We know that one of the reasons that the needs of those students were not being adequately met in our public school system was because of the specific training that our teachers needed in order to understand the learning disabilities of the students in their class, and also to have a cadre of strategies that they could use, that they could draw on to help meet those needs. And you can go back, we have a very, very dedicated teaching staff across our province, and they are committed to every student in their classroom. And many of them were feeling a bit frustrated that they were not able to adequately meet all of the needs of all of those students. So in order to make sure that our teachers are well equipped, well trained, and well understand the learning disabilities, we need to start at the university level. And the programs that are offered in our teacher training institutions, and we've spoken about those earlier, those programs for teacher training need to have a component of that curriculum that focuses in particular on students' learning disabilities, understanding the disability, and understanding how to provide programming that is appropriate to those students. So that kind of a change does not happen quickly, and it does not happen overnight. But we've recognized that. We've talked to universities about that. We've talked to teacher training departments at the universities about including something in their curriculum so that teachers who graduate from those universities have had some specific training. Without that specific training, it's very challenging for teachers to take on the challenge of working with students with special needs. Another significant part of the delivery of program to students with special needs is the class size. And we know that one of the reasons why the three schools, in particular the three private schools, have the success they do has to do with the student-teacher ratio. And so, again, you have to look at having teachers who have the training, who have the strategies. You have to look at a classroom environment where those students can get the one-on-one that they need. And again, that is all part of putting together a program in our public school that will help meet those needs. And as I said, these changes do take time. We are committed to making sure that we work towards that goal. This year, 128 students are taking advantage of the tuition support program. Each one of those students gets the $6,400 that normally would go to the board. It goes from the board, it follows the student to the private institution, and so that is part of the tuition that is payable to the private school. There are also, in addition to that, based on income and income needs of the families, 53 applicants were made application for additional funding, supplementary funding to that. 51 of those were approved, and that translated into $171,000 that the government paid to help support those families with that financial burden. So the cost of the program is not really the issue. The cost of the program is something that is secondary to the academic needs of those students. We have 3 schools in our province who've been designated as schools where our young people can go on the tuition support program. But again, that is limited to the geography of the metro area and the Annapolis Valley, and that is not good enough. Every student in this province, regardless of where they live, if there's a need for them to have an intervention program, it should be close to home. It should be where they can stay in their own home, where they can take advantage of that additional support. And so in my response to the special ed review, I will not be accepting recommendation number 3. But I will be accepting a recommendation which says that we will do a complete review of the tuition support program. We've just started that, and we want to make sure that the programs that we deliver are available to all students in our province, that they are free of charge, and we believe that that's the goal that this government will work toward. And so with respect to the review that, or my response to the review, I will not be accepting recommendation number 3. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess before I go too far, I guess in my preamble, I want to maybe talk a wee bit, if I may, about the term special needs, because I'm a firm believer that all learners, all youth in Nova Scotia are individuals, and as such have special needs which are unique to them as individuals. And for me, and I think probably for most of my colleagues, that all students, all youth are special indeed. However, for the benefit of this conversation and in spirit of Bill number 35, I'll use special needs as it's been referenced. And I think that'll add to the clarity and the understanding for this conversation alone. With respect to learning in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, I want to praise the Minister of Education for establishing the task force to review special education. I also wish to acknowledge the education critic for the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia. And I stand in my place today in support of Bill 35. Further, Mr. Speaker, it is incumbent upon me to express to some degree my disappointment with parts of the task force review. The review offered no significant or meaningful alternatives to the government's current policy on limited investment in special needs education. Also, there was very poor evidence-based accountability for money that has been spent thus far. It is also my opinion, Mr. Speaker, there was not sufficient consultation with parents, educators, and other stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, despite the scope of the report, there was limited with respect to researching new funding and new educational options in our public education system. I think one of the things that government should be exploring is what are we going to do differently? I think it's pretty well widely accepted that the private institutions do a lot of things right, and that there's some things that we do in the public school system that fail certain learners, especially those around special needs. Parents of children with special needs often feel that they have very little choice when it comes to spending their hard-earned dollars and getting funding support to send their children to academies such as Bridgeway, Churchill, and Landmark. The private academies have been established. They've been established for a reason. If it wasn't for the reason or reasons, they wouldn't exist. So they are there for a reason, and that's to fill the void that's been necessitated by the, I don't want to say the fault, but by the failure of the public school system in Nova Scotia to meet individual needs. The Department of Education and the school boards need to consult more with one another, and they have to consult about ways of proper funding in the public school system, and how can they duplicate what they do in the private academies, and how can they transfer that into the public school system so all kids with special needs can benefit from it. Parents who have children with special needs don't want to, I don't think they want to remove their child from the public school system. I think they're forced. I think they're forced to remove their child from the public school system because their child is falling through the cracks through the current educational system. And that's at no fault to the educators, but it's roughly, and I think the minister hit certainly one of the nails on the head when she talked about classroom size. I think this is a huge problem in our public school system. And even in the elementary grades, when we even have a policy to cap classes at 25, and I certainly know within the riding of Waverley, Fall River, Beaverbank, which I can speak to directly, that policy is not always applied or adhered to. Tuition support is a necessary and essential government requirement. It exists for a reason. Bill 35, to some degree, is about choice. It's about choice on a number of levels. Mr. Speaker, parents of children with special needs often feel that they have no choice but to send their children to private academies. If the right paperwork is in place, the province then supports such a choice. After 3 years, however, the province says, well, you don't have our support for choice anymore. You can no longer make that choice. The parents then must go and bear the full cost of their child still attending the private school, or put their children back into a system that they know that has already failed them once. So they're sort of in a catch-22 situation, and for some families, the choice has been eliminated because they can't afford to bear the brunt of the cost to go into the private school. Therefore, they have to make a choice to go further in debt or put them into a system where they've already known the system has failed their child. I think public schools, what we have to do, and I'm looking forward to the minister putting together this task force, this committee, to study the ways that they can incorporate some of those strategies and some of those ideas that the private school utilizes, and how we can get more teachers in the classroom. And then we come down to an issue around space. And what we're currently doing, we have this philosophy, I think, probably within government, that sometimes bigger is better. And we've just seen that in the construction of some new schools in recent years. And I would probably argue that bigger isn't always better. And I go back to years gone by when classes were much smaller, and teachers could give a smaller class those individuals that better one-on-one attention, as opposed now to having the large classrooms. One of the concerns that I have when I look at education in Nova Scotia, and I look at the human resources, particularly when it comes to educators, teachers, I haven't seen a huge increase in the complement of teachers that we hire today compared to what 5 and 10 years ago. I see other costs going up, but I think the numbers of teachers in the classroom has remained pretty well stable over the last number of years, which has created a huge problem in our public school systems. With that, I just want to again reiterate that we do support Bill 35, and I hope that while we're in support of Bill 35 is that this government, this province will move forward with a greater a strategy that's going to be further ahead. And the minister also mentioned about, and I don't know the word exactly, but she said funding follows the student. And it's too bad that when that funding leaves the public school system, that's less dollars that those schools have and those school boards have to address the problems within the public school system. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat.
Thank you. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill 35 is a very important bill, and if you look through the process of having your child with a learning disability, one that can be corrected, and the public school system at present isn't equipped to handle most of these situations. And I really want to thank the present government for some people in my community that have been very well served by the addition of the program to extend the tuition support to some of the families that have seen a significant improvement in the young people that have attended Bridgeway and Churchill Academy and other places in the province that are geared up to especially help young people that are in need. And it is a good program. I was very disappointed with the report that came back and suggested this be eliminated and for another model. This model works very, very well and does indeed help young people. The only problem with the program in the past is access. There's been so many people out there that need assistance. They're either delayed so long in the public school system getting evaluations done or indeed identifying the problem that the problem goes on so long that it's usually too late to help the young person. And by that time, they may drop out. And as my colleague had said in the past in the Nunn report, about 75% of the young people in the correctional centers have dropped out of school. So it shows that early intervention is well worth the effort. It's a lot better to spend $6,000 or $7,000 a year on a young person to give them a future in life rather than spend the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars down the road and the property damage they cause if they're continually breaking the law and doing other things because they're frustrated and can't get a job because they don't have the necessary education and training they should have in order to earn themselves a proper living, as all of us would expect as we get old enough to work and want to enter the workforce in a meaningful way. So I think early intervention in this program is very important. I'm very pleased to hear from the minister this evening that she's not going to endorse the recommendation number 3 that would have eliminated this tuition support. And I think that would have been a major step backwards in this province, a major step backwards. And indeed, with the possibility of this being extended for a lot longer time and more families involved in it and more private schools set up to do this situation, I think would be to the benefit of all Nova Scotians. And you take a young person, you give them an education, give them an opportunity to get a good job and to work and add to our society. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful gift that we can give. And when you look at the cost of giving that gift, it's pretty low in comparison to the frustration the family has to go through and that individual has to go through as they get later on in life and they can't do things that their friends can do. They don't have the earning power that their friends have because they don't have the education. And that individual may be one of the best people in a certain area with some help that existed in our province before. Usually these young people are very intelligent, but they have a problem with math or history or English or grammar, whatever the case may be. Each student is different. So if you can take those problems away and help them address those issues and get those issues addressed so they can continue their education and finish the education, it's very, very important. You know, over the past 4 years, the tuition support program has moved from 1 year to a 3-year program. Again, I want to commend the government for doing that. I know my colleague Leo Gavin has been very instrumental in pushing the province to do that, and they have listened. Sometimes they don't listen, but this time they did listen, and it's worked well for many, many families. And we truly all win as Nova Scotians when that kind of cooperation takes place, and we see the results of these young people. I have a few families in my riding that have been affected positively by this program, and I mean extremely positively. You can see the young people when they come and see me, they say, "Hi, Mr. Caldwell, how are you?" And their families are really excited to see that the young people are doing well in school, and indeed, in some cases, are excelling beyond the belief of their parents. And that's a marvelous thing to have happen. When you work towards and you raise a young child and you have all the hopes in the world for the child, and if for some reason, no fault of your own, no fault of the child, they have a disability, a minor disability. In some cases, it can cause huge problems down the road, and it's not obvious. If you see somebody that has a physical disability, it's obvious. But somebody with a learning disability is not always obvious. And I can remember a parent calling me one time in my area some time ago and explaining the wonderful thing that a young teacher had done in the community and the school she went to, and identified in grade 2 a learning difficulty that her daughter had been having, and having a great deal of difficulty going to school. She hated to go to school, and at grade 2 you should enjoy going to school. The young teacher identified this. Luckily she knew enough about the situation, and she took the daughter, this young girl, aside and taught her how to learn in a particular field, and that's all it took. It only took a few months, and that student then was on track. That's simple. And if that intervention wouldn't have been made, that young girl today was probably in grade 10 or 11, would have been having an extremely difficult time in school, and probably today enjoying school very much, as they should do at that age, and doing the social things that young people like to do, and at the same time learning the very valuable skills that they need to take a productive place in our society and in our province. And I want to commend that teacher and the parents for working together with that one child. I won't name them here today, but that's the kind of intervention I like to see. That's the kind of intervention that helps us all as Nova Scotians make our economy stronger, and a very special place to live. There's a very good friend of mine come to see me this year before the program went in place, and was having an awful time getting through the process of tuition support. And I talked to her about it, and we talked about an appeal process, and I wrote a letter on her behalf to get this thing in place. And I was very pleased to see that the government did include her grandson in this program, and indeed did help that family very, very much. Very nice young man, young man that can learn a lot and take a very productive place in society. But without that opportunity, that $6,400 that the province changed from the school to the special program, all it took. It's all it took. Now, it may take 2 or 3 years for the young man to get up to the grade level that he should be at, but he's made significant improvements in just a few months. Just a few months. Hey, it was a really bad problem with at school. He was being bullied at school. He hated to go to school and just simply didn't like school. And now he gets up in the morning and he says to his mother and his grandmother, he says, "Look, I can't wait to go to school." He's up, he's dressed, he's all set to go. And that's a complete change. You know, and just from that standpoint alone, you see a young person that had very great difficulty in the school system being rewarded with the very valuable thing that we all enjoyed when we went to school, loving to go to school. Not all of us did, but most of us did. And from time to time we didn't. But if you had the thought every day of coming to work every day and hating what you did and being harassed by your coworkers, you wouldn't last at it very long. You just wouldn't. But a young child has no choice. They go to school. The school did everything they could to help the situation, but it just simply wasn't enough. They weren't equipped to handle the situation this young man was in, and only because of learning difficulty, nothing else. And say that is being addressed now. And there's other people that have slipped through the cracks that simply couldn't get qualified for this, didn't didn't get this in place and didn't have the opportunity to get in this program that could have probably helped their children. And I see the results of that in our community. You see young people turning to crime, which is very unfortunate, very nice families, wonderful families, and maybe if they would have had this opportunity to identify difficulties they had in school, it might have given them an opportunity to take a more valuable place in society and enjoy life themselves and much more. And that's what it's really all about, enjoying life, enjoying our province, and adding to the economy. So again, I can't, this is one of those things that the government has done right. They have done it absolutely right. The only thing they've done wrong is they haven't had enough spaces yet available in this program. The spaces have to be done, more of them for people to take advantage of it. The intervention has to be much faster. It can't take 3 or 4 or 5 years to get a young person into this. Much sooner would be better. And hopefully the minister, when she reviews this whole process and moves forward to a recommendation on this, that she sees the wisdom in extending this program. And I really think the ultimate answer in this is portable funding. If you want to take your child out of one school and put them in another school, the funding should go with the student. Now that creates some problems in the school boards, but in reality, if the school boards are organized properly and they do their job properly, portable funding would cure this problem. Then someone could take and take their child and put them in a school where it's best suited for that child, and that would end 99% of the problems and would make available some of these other places for people that just haven't had the time to get the background work done and all the interventions done that's needed prior to going into this tuition support program. And there's other programs. And I've talked to people too about similar things, that a school that the child is in is not suited for that child for whatever reason, and they move into another school, and that's been very successful. Well, those words of encouragement to the minister to move this positively forward, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Time has expired for debate on Bill number 35. The Honourable House Leader of the Liberal Party.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call resolution number 636?
Resolution 636. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And this is a very important subject that we're going to talk about for the next few minutes. The resolution relates to domestic violence, Mr. Speaker. And tomorrow is December 6th, which is the day in which women and men across Canada remember the massacre in Montreal of 14 young women, and also listen and think and learn about domestic violence and what we can do to eliminate it in our society. And Mr. Speaker, a great many things have happened in the ensuing years, but we haven't done a great deal to see that this problem becomes less of an issue in our society. It's just as prevalent today as it has been in years past. And the reason we want to speak about it not only at this time of year but throughout the year is that we as members of the legislature should be at the forefront of seeking solutions, looking for programs that might help in our communities, funding the transition houses and the women's programs that will help to address this and provide a safety net for women who are living in violence, and basically trying to look for the best solutions that are in any other jurisdiction around the world, so that women and men in our society here in Nova Scotia can live safely and not have to fear for their lives. And Mr. Speaker, that takes some effort, and it takes some searching, some research, some commitment for funding from the government in order to see that happen. In the 1990s, Mr. Speaker, when the Liberal government was in power, we had a program in place that was called the Family Violence Prevention Initiative. And it did exactly that. It tried to bring together people from different departments, not unlike what is being done now with the Nunn Commission, looking for impacts, in that case, the Nunn Commission for Youth Violence and how to help young people in conflict with the law. The Family Violence Prevention Initiative tried to bring together various departments, education, justice, community services, and health, to address the issues around domestic violence and to look for solutions that would make the problem at least be alleviated to some extent. But, Mr. Speaker, that program was cut not very long ago, or not very long after the Conservatives took power in 1999. And even more recently, the federal Conservatives have cut funding to the national status of women, closing offices here in Nova Scotia and in a number of other provinces, when the federal minister actually said that there was no need to have a special status of women department or office, because in fact we were equal and there was no difficulty and we didn't have any special obstacles to overcome. And I'm glad that today here in the legislature we can talk about that and say that there are obstacles. And what I'm most concerned about, Mr. Speaker, is that every day when we pick up the newspaper here in Nova Scotia and read our local papers, we read about women who have lost their lives in domestic violence. And the numbers just keep growing. And the resolution refers to the number of 84 women who died between 1991 and 2006 as the victims of homicide. And the figures are quite clear, Mr. Speaker, that it is 37 times, I believe it is, 37 times more likely that a woman will be killed by a partner or someone she knows well, rather than by a stranger. The majority of those homicides would be exactly that, death at the hands of somebody you know well or an intimate partner. And that's just not acceptable, Mr. Speaker. In a small province like ours, we should not be looking at enormous numbers like that of women who've lost their lives. I think it's important today to mention the Silent Witness program, which is a fairly new program here in our province, but is patterned on one that exists in several other provinces and in some of the states, which actually seeks to identify the women who've lost their lives and to honor them in all of our communities so that we remember, and they don't become faceless, nameless statistics, but they actually come to life so that people can remember that they were somebody's mother, somebody's daughter or sister, and so on. Really give them the honor they deserve. And I hope that that program will, again, bring attention to this issue in every community in our province as they get established and have an exhibit that will actually travel the province and raise attention to this issue. But my point of rising today, Mr. Speaker, and there is not a great deal of time for such an important issue, my point is to rise and to call on the government to do more about this issue. They stopped the Family Violence Prevention Initiative. They've supported the federal government that has gone ahead and cut the status of women offices. And I haven't seen any action in the 4+ years that I've been here in the legislature. And I've just seen nothing substantive that has come from this government that has been a move towards improving the situation as it relates to family violence. Transition houses and women's centers are still limping along with minimal budgets, unable to provide the kind of services that they would like to, unable to do the outreach into the wider community that is so important. Mr. Speaker, if we're going to make a difference in terms of family violence, we're going to have education, and we're going to have outreach workers that go to schools, that make themselves available to women who are frightened to leave their homes or frightened to be seen in an office like a government office or a transition house. We have to help them in that transition from their homes of violence. And the only way to do that is to have people that can go out and respond to the needs of women. And that's not happening right now, Mr. Speaker, because we don't have enough people or the resources assigned to it. There's a great deal of need for action on this, Mr. Speaker. A year ago, I introduced a bill called the Domestic Violence Elimination Act, which called on the government to form a committee with multiple stakeholders to review this problem and look for answers, whether it be here in our province or around the world. And, Mr. Speaker, it's essential that they do just that we start to get action on this problem, and that we also introduce the Domestic Violence Court, which we discussed just recently in one of the bills that were brought in during this session by the Liberal Party. I'm calling on the government to give this serious attention so that we can start to make a difference and stop reading about these horrendous cases every day in our communities. It's not just a city problem. It's not a problem of poverty alone. It happens in every community, in every walk of life, Mr. Speaker. And I think the time has come now for us to take action. I look forward to hearing the government's response. Thank you.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the Honourable Minister of Human Resources and responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not happy, I guess, to stand and speak to this subject matter because it is a very important subject matter that we're discussing here today. It would be a happy day if we could report that violence against women has stopped. But if we do look at the updated fact sheets from the Advisory Council on the Status of Women, we definitely do see a different story. 1 woman in 12 faces violence from an intimate partner, boyfriend, or husband, and 2/3 of the incidents of spousal violence are not reported to police. Women in Nova Scotia are about 40 times more likely to be killed by a spouse or intimate partner than they are by a stranger. Aboriginal women experience 4 times the violence as non-Aboriginal women and are at least 3 times more likely to have experienced spousal violence than non-Aboriginal women. About 88% of sexual assaults in Canada do not get reported to police. In more than 3/4 of the cases reported to Halifax Regional Police in 2005, victims of sexual offenses knew the accused. In 2005, only 26% of reported sexual assaults in Nova Scotia resulted in the laying of a charge against the accused, down from 56% in 1993. According to data collected through the Nova Scotia Senior Abuse toll-free line, 2/3 of calls identify women as the subject of senior abuse. Mr. Speaker, there's more work to be done, but there are many dedicated people in services working to stop the violence, and they are working together. Regarding the need for legislation, look to the Department of Justice website to find documents supporting the need for coordinated efforts, rather than the need for new legislation. For instance, the 1995 Framework for Action Against Family Violence, and reviewed again in 2001, concluded a comprehensive strategy would improve the response of the criminal justice system to family violence. The framework recommended better procedures for responding to family violence, based on a pro-arrest, pro-charge, and pro-prosecution policy. It recommended clear direction for justice workers, community agencies, and the public. Progress is being made. The 2006 report of the Nova Scotia Family Violence Tracking Project found great improvement in police response. The likelihood of being charged jumped 28% from 1995 to 2005. Police response rates have consistently improved, increasing from 83% in 1995 to 89% in 2005. Arrest rates have improved from 26% over arrest rates in 1995, and charge rates have increased by 28% over the same period. Clearly, this government and its agencies take domestic abuse very seriously. Another recommendation from the Framework for Action was training for all justice workers to help them understand family violence, their responsibility in responding to incidents, and the roles and responsibilities of other justice workers and agencies. That training is now standard. There are also more supports to help the victim navigate the court system and to protect them from harm. Efforts have been made to improve the interagency coordination among all those involved, including more resources for community-based projects and local interagency committees on family violence. Moreover, Nova Scotia's Domestic Violence Intervention Act, introduced in 2003, provides for emergency protection. An independent consultant gave the act a favorable review. The Department of Community Services funds transition houses, women's centers, men's intervention programs, and sexual assault services. The Department of Health raises awareness of violence against pregnant women through a poster campaign. For help, a woman might call the police department. She may call a transition house, a woman's resource center, sexual assault service, or victim services. Mr. Speaker, these are important services and supports. However, the Statistics Canada report, Family Violence in Canada, a statistical profile, tells another story, and I quote, "A review of police records from 1995 to 2005 reveals that nearly 3/4 of spousal homicides or attempted spousal homicides, the perpetrator had no prior arrest history for spousal abuse. For most women in abusive relationships, the first contact for help is a family member or a friend. That's why the Advisory Council publication, Making Changes, a book for women in abusive relationships, is distributed by thousands every year. Making Changes contains information, advice, and a directory of services for women seeking help for themselves and their children. It's available in both English and French. And Mr. Speaker, these are a few of the resources that we have available out there. And it now contains advice and information for families and friends on signs of abuse, ways to offer support, and a list of do's and don'ts. Mr. Speaker, the resolution mentions that the government has a role in raising awareness on women's issue, and the Advisory Council on the Status of Women raises awareness about violence against women through media publications and reports, as well as many other things. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Speaker, abuse of women is called many things: wife battering, wife assault, domestic violence, and on and on and on. But whatever we call it, abuse is all about power and control. And it happens across age ranges, religions, cultures, income levels. But what the abusers have in common is the mistaken belief that it is okay to hurt people, even those they love. Now, my colleagues have, in their earlier remarks, talked a little bit about the current situation here in Nova Scotia and about some of the current programs and services available to help women once they are abused, and also children who are the victims of domestic violence. I want to concentrate more on what proactive steps I think the government should be taking to meet some of these challenges. I want to mention that certain groups of women are more vulnerable and at higher risk of abuse than others. And I don't think we can ever forget these. And these include senior women, women with disabilities, young women who are in common law relationships, and also Aboriginal women. They suffer, and I didn't mean to leave out the African Nova Scotian women as well. Because of challenges within their communities and their cultures, sometimes they face even stronger difficulties in escaping abusive situations. So as a society, we have a responsibility to set a higher standard and a higher expectation for ourselves about gender equality and about healthy relationships. And governments have to take the lead. Gender equality has to be integrated into policy planning and legislation, into program priorities, into funding and budget preparation. We don't see that priority. We see a small attempt to meet some of the needs of the women and children who actually get into these situations, but we don't see that comprehensive overall strategy that will prevent families, women and children in particular, from falling into this situation. The Conservative government has actually taken 2 steps backward. It's been mentioned earlier that the Family Violence Prevention Initiative was cut, and this was a coordinating body that brought together representatives from government and from community-based services so that they could coordinate their efforts and make sure that they were all going in a similar direction, and it was working extremely well. The other program cut that the Conservative government did was the Criminal Injuries Compensation Program, and this provided financial assistance to victims of crime, and the majority of those were actually women who were leaving or had suffered under domestic violence situations. I want to pay credit or give credit to a lot of the community-based organizations and nonprofit groups that are taking a lead in this. And I too want to mention the transition houses, the women's centers, the sexual abuse and men's intervention programs. They're doing incredible work with few resources, with a growing demand in very difficult situations. So we have to stop this cycle of family and domestic violence. And this government needs to be challenged to provide more funding for the current programs, to look at the earning gap between men and women, to create more affordable housing, to look at more opportunities for higher education and training for women, particularly single mothers and others on income assistance within that program. We don't see the comprehensive quality childcare system. All of these are determinants of, they actually create some of the situations where women and children cannot leave an abusive situation. This government's had many, many opportunities to take the lead, and they have failed to come forward. They need to adopt a gender budgeting approach. They need to do a gender analysis on their legislation. Public policy does not treat men and women equally, and this government has not recognized that. I do want to close by saying that the Nova Scotia NDP believe that Nova Scotian women deserve fairness. They deserve affordability. They deserve equal opportunities, equal pay for equal work, and a decent standard of living, and the freedom to live without fear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start off by commending my colleague from Halifax, Clayton Park, for bringing forward Resolution 636. And as the Minister for the Status of Women said, it's not a subject that's a pleasant one for us to talk about, but one that certainly needs to be discussed, especially here in the legislature in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased to be the sole male to speak on this issue, because it's important to recognize that this is not a subject that should only be discussed by the female members of this House, but it's one that the male members of this House must not only recognize but support the efforts and support the fact that much more needs to be done, Mr. Speaker. And there is no doubt that society has been changing and has been recognizing that violence against women or violence against anyone is unacceptable. But we still have a long ways to go, Mr. Speaker, because the statistics provided by the Minister for the Status of Women show us that there's much more remains to be done. It's extremely troubling in 2007 to hear that those types of statistics still exist. Mr. Speaker, even in my own writing, I often have the opportunity to speak with the sergeants and corporals who come to work in Richmond for the RCMP, and I often ask them, what is the one biggest issue that faces you here in Richmond? And sometimes I expect to hear it's drinking and driving, it's youth crime, it's burglaries. Instead, the one biggest issue that they have to face, which they dread the most, is domestic violence. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, that that's not unique to Richmond County. I would say that that is an issue that faces the RCMP and local police enforcement in almost every corner of Nova Scotia. And that's why there's so much more needs to be done. And Mr. Speaker, education is one of the most important elements to changing society's attitudes towards domestic violence. And we need to do more to educate our children as they're going through the education system to understand that violence is unacceptable. And violence against women is even more unacceptable. And we have to make sure that our children understand that growing up. And we've gone a long ways in many other areas, whether it's drinking and driving, drug use, everything else, that we've been able to educate our children to have different mindsets than what may have existed 10 or 20 years ago or even longer. And we need to do that as well for domestic violence at the same time. Mr. Speaker, this gives me an opportunity as well to speak about a very important organization in the Strait area, which is the Leaside Transition House. And Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to publicly commend the Executive Director and all of the staff of the Leaside Transition House for the work that they do under very difficult circumstances, but they are there to assist families. Many times it's not only women, but it's women and children that appear at their doorstep following domestic violence. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that we continue to support the efforts of Leaside Transition House and all of the transition homes that we have throughout the province. And a few years ago, there was concerns about government cuts to those transition homes, and we were pleased to see that that decision was reversed, and we would encourage the government to continue to find ways of investing in these transition homes. And Mr. Speaker, we can only hope that one day we may be able to say we don't need transition homes, but unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, The reality is, it seems that they will be needed for much longer than we would hope. So with those comments, Mr. Speaker, I want to again commend my colleague from Halifax Clayton Park for bringing this issue forward. I believe all of us here in the House, government included, recognize that more needs to be done. I believe there is unanimous support by all members for government to initiate new programs and new approaches to trying to put an end to violence against women in this province and to domestic violence in general, regardless of whatever race, religion or language one might be from. Mr. Speaker, with those comments, I thank the Minister and the member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley for her comments on this as well, and hopefully together as members of the House of Assembly we can look forward to a day where we can see real results, and those results will be in better safety and better environments for women and for all Nova Scotians in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. There's approximately about a minute and a half. I recognize the Honourable, the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I echo my colleague's comments that it is indeed unfortunate that we need to rise and speak to this issue. But, Mr. Speaker, I echo the comments from other colleagues who indicate that it is absolutely essential, Mr. Speaker, that we continue to address, to recognize, and to speak to the extremely important issue of domestic violence, violence against women, violence against children, Mr. Speaker, violence against families. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the member for Richmond, Mr. Speaker, on his comments regarding the fact that, Mr. Speaker, this is not a woman issue. This is a society issue, and I want to start off by saying that, Mr. Speaker, and it only comes from the recognition of all members of society that we truly can make advances, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I will add in my final